Hey everybody, welcome to Master Race Debaters. It's February 4th, 2019, and this is our bonus episode. This week, I sat down with Liana K from Ed and Red Nights Party on Much Music. She also has her own YouTube channel. I want you to check that out. It's called Liana K. And we talked about conversation, really. I originally had her on the podcast because I wanted to talk about the importance of white people having conversations about race with each other, but kind of expanded from there. It's a very interesting chat. I learned things in this podcast, and she's very insightful. I think you're going to enjoy it. So without further ado, here we go.
So, okay, I'm recording now. It's very unprofessional.
Great start. Yeah.
I was skimming through YouTube trying to I go through YouTube every once in a while just to find like-mindedness. Like I like videos. Like I love ContraPoints' channel and Three Arrows. There's a lot of good channels out there, and I came across you. Oh yeah, I love her stuff.
Yeah.
And I came across your video about Jordan Peterson. You had a few of them, and I was just like, you had one where it was like 48 minutes, and you just broke down his explanation about
his explanation of somebody else's explanation of why he's not wrong.
Yes, it was. Yeah. It was on Reddit, and it was and it was really good how you went through it, and it was very fascinating, which led me down another deep dive. And I saw the video you were talking about the monk debates, and you're one of the few people on YouTube, like I told you before, that agreed with me on the monk debates. I find I don't want to talk about Jordan Peterson, but there was a point in the monk debates that really bothered me when he was talking about white privilege, and he was like, well, what percentage? And I was just like, this guy doesn't at least understand that concept before
that was sophistry on his part. He's trying to value quantitatively something that is a qualitative phenomenon. Yeah, you can't assign a number to it.
So you think he was doing that on purpose?
I think there is you know how some people do very meticulous planning in a form of completely nonsensical self-defense? Mm-hmm. I think there's an element of that with Jordan Peterson. Like, he's clearly got his own demons.
Okay.
He publishes this rules for life that he doesn't follow himself. Mm-hmm. Except, I assume he stops to pet a cat on the street. That one I actually agree with. That humanized him for me. Jordan Peterson's a cat person. We can hang out.
Yeah.
But one of the things the New York Times pointed out in the quasi-hit piece, profile they did on him was that he has a perpetually messy office.
Yes, I remember reading that.
Yeah, and I think that's a metaphor for him. He has these rules. He's big on ideals. Mm-hmm. He likes these ideals of antiquity that are, deceptively comforting in how easy they seem to be. But of course they are, because they were relatively homogenous societies where women had very few rights and there were slaves all over the place.
Hence his hierarchy is so important, right? Like, that's his push, is all about hierarchies. My thing is because he also, Micah Eric Dyson called him a mean, angry white man. And this is the point.
That moment, mean, mad white man. I was like, oh, he reverse code switched. Mm-hmm. In an academic debate. Mm-hmm. And it blew up in Dyson's face.
Yeah.
But I thought that was quite a moment, because Michael Eric Dyson, that was the moment I think he deliberately threw the debate. Mm-hmm. For FUBU reasons, the for us, by us.
So you think Dyson was kind of virtue signaling to his audience, saying, reverse code switching? I mean,
code switching and virtue signaling aren't the same thing.
No, it's not. But
it's not. I think that he was doing, in the old Superman cartoons, mm-hmm. where he'd be like, I had a little run-in with a mixed pickle, and he winks to the camera.
Yeah.
I think it was one of those moments in using, and Michael Eric Dyson does this all the time, mm-hmm. he uses the language of the Southern Black church in an academic context.
Yes, and
that's his whole stylistic deal.
And so I noticed a lot of white people, and Jordan Peterson included, didn't get that.
Well, of course not. They have no experience with the Southern Black church. They don't know what that means. I mean, that whole mean, mad white man is the language of the blacks in the antebellum.
Yeah, exactly. It's like I got it. I understood it. I guess the idea of like I've been in conversations with white people, and I've used, like, I posted something a couple weeks ago. We talked about it where I said white trash is a classist term, not a racist term. And I got a lot of pushback on that. People were saying, "Oh no, it's actually racist." I'm like, but the word white isn't a racist thing.
Well, what's interesting to me is that you have to actually modify the term trash to make it clear you're talking about white people.
Exactly.
Because when the term originated, trash meant everybody else but white people, plus, those people living in trailer parks, sort of thing. It's a complicated term.
Yes.
But we've already added about 5 layers of density to this thing, and that's why it gets so complex. You are talking about layers of lived experience and intersectionalism in itself is not taught well.
Okay.
And if you actually look at all the elements of intersectionalism and you deep dive into sort of its Marxist origins, what we're talking about is class by other names, no matter what.
Yes.
If you look at redlining housing practices in the U.S., it wasn't that black neighborhoods became run down. It was black neighborhoods were instantly seen as less desirable because there were black people in them. That is forcing people on the basis of skin color into a lower class. And that's a huge problem with the systemic racism in America. Up here, we do it to our indigenous people.
Yes.
But it's the same thing.
Statistics show that it's indigenous and then black and brown people.
Yeah, I grew up at Tobermory and Finch. Mm-hmm. I grew up in a predominantly black neighborhood. And to this day, it's kind of funny to see people shit their pants based when I tell them where I grew up.
Which is, again, like, when I was younger, Jane and Finch and those areas were, like, I was born in Malvern. I grew up in Scarborough. But, again, it's like, when people talk about Scarborough, I'm like, I don't know that Scarborough. It's like they're terrified of, like, well, this can happen. I live in Hamilton now. I find Hamilton scarier than...
Down Mountain Hamilton is kind of scary. Everybody
it's
looks
terrifying.
like a retired boxer.
Yeah, I say it's like the Dust Bowl happened again. Like, they're all...
Yeah.
Everyone's a dust farmer out here.
Yeah, but that's comfort as well. I hear you. There's a line in an old Sanford and Son episode. You know that old sitcom?
Yep.
Where Red Fox, as Fred Sanford, walks into a house and goes, "This house has no smell. It smells like lettuce." And I fell off the couch laughing because where we grew up, all the buttons were, the numbers were burned out in indicating the floor in the Tobermory apartment building. So you knew you were your friend's floor. You opened up, it smelled right. Every floor had a different smell depending on who was cooking what on the floor.
Yeah.
So the idea of house smell, it's true, but that is a cultural thing.
Yes.
And we refer to it as a racialized thing. It's really not. It's a geographic, cultural thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay. The reason I wanted you on the podcast was touching on all this is I find my theory is I feel white people need to start talking about race. Like watching Jordan Peterson get upset about, like you said when you talked to me on Facebook, you said he was more upset about the word white man than he was about...
Mean and mad.
Yeah, he was fine with that. He's like, I'm that.
Yeah, because my whole thing, I would be the most upset about being called mean.
Yes.
Because you can't control being white. You can't control if you're insane. You can control if you're mean or not. Mm-hmm. It just shows where his sensitivity lies. What hurts him when you poke it. And I do think there is some sort of class resentment going on with him because he didn't grow up in the right white place. Mm. And so, that classism, that white trash thing is coming back. And that is the problem, that unfortunately intersectionalist discussions fail to persuade in a lot of cases because they don't actually practice true intersectionalism, which is an interworking of different systems of oppression. Mm-hmm. They silo race and sexual orientation and various other things, and they very rarely bring up economic class or geographic predestiny.
Huh. Which is weird because I'm not college educated or university educated on this stuff, but I always assumed that intersectionality, coming back with the original creators of identity politics, class was a huge part of that. Like talking about and dealing with class was always a huge part.
The best way to explain intersectionality is that you can have, say, two black transgender lesbians.
Mm-hmm.
They do not have identical experiences. There are other things going on at play with those sorts of identities. And I really think we do make too much of gender and race and stuff like that at the detriment of the individual, which is why I think that, Kevin Hart's comedy is so important, and he got smacked down for being honest in a way that wasn't politically correct.
Yeah.
Shows like Blackish are really brilliant. Again, I'm really careful about my praise for that show because I don't want Black Twitter getting mad at me. But so far, so good, mostly. Roxane Gay did tell me off once on Twitter, and that was really disappointing because I really admired her work.
What did she say to you?
Basically, shut up, little white girl, was essentially it. And I'm like, what? Because she was on MSNBC,
mm-hmm.
and I forget who she was attacking, somebody like Taylor Swift
mm-hmm.
or something like that. And I tweeted her saying, you know what, you can go after somebody on ideals without attacking them as a person.
Yeah.
Like, come on. And her little psychophantic followers went after me, and it's like, you know what, I liked your run on Black Panther. I'm sorry I know you as a person in this way now.
Yeah.
Because that was an asshole move. Like,
yeah.
That's another thing that if we're not so terrified of being labeled an ism that we don't check people when we think they're wrong, then that actually is a form of benevolent racism or benevolent sexism.
Well, they're in that moment, like you're going back and forth and you're just getting heated between conversations, like talking on Twitter, for example. I'm not justifying what they're saying. I'm just saying there's no thought put into it.
Well, nobody listens to each other.
No.
Everybody's just projecting.
Right. Between your response, her response, and your response, that person's thinking of what else to say.
They're listening to respond, not listen to understand.
Yeah, I do that all the time.
Well, Jordan Peterson's followers ruined listening to understand with all those memes of so what you're saying is. So it's too bad because that's actually the way to talk honestly and kindly with other people about difficult subjects.
But this isn't about conversation. This is about silencing. Like this is about like I don't just get in line and shut the fuck up. Right? That's really what that is. Which
is really unfortunate because that's we live in an era of monetized grievance.
Yes.
An era of Maclean's magazine called it grievance peddling.
Yeah.
Where both the monetized right and the monetized left are just in a self-perpetuating cycle of grievance peddling, and one side doesn't actually want the other side to go away.
It's true.
Because that fight between, the Jordan Petersons and the Michael Eric Dysons of the world, well, they give each other a platform through opposition.
Mm-hmm.
People may have disagreed with Michael Eric Dyson in that debate, but they heard him, and his words had an impact.
That's true.
And that's more than most black academics get nowadays. I hate to say it.
Yes, it's true. That's we were talking about. We just released an episode about Louis C.K. and it's like people are calling him, saying they're trying to censor him. It's like, no, this is a man that can he's not a comic anymore. He's a news story.
I'm glad you said that because that was my view on it as well, and I got hammered for that. People said I was anti-free speech.
Well, it's not. There's no censorship. He can get on stage anytime he wants. He was working the best comedy club in the world. He can get on that anytime. He can do a Netflix special tomorrow if he wanted to. Yeah. There's no censorship.
I don't know anymore, but there's an odd. And it's an odd protection around Louis C.K., and I think, again, because he exudes victimhood in his own way.
Mm-hmm.
You can't criticize the guy without being accused of being pro-censorship. And, the thing that surprised me most about the Louis C.K. thing is it's very hard to get comedians of any stripe to agree with each other. You may have noticed.
Yeah, no.
But usually comedians are very, very hesitant to criticize each other in public because we've all had to deal with withering amounts of criticism.
Yeah.
And so many people came out and were just like, not okay.
Yeah.
And that really surprised me. That isn't something you see very often. Like,
with comics saying that it's not cool that he's going on stage.
Well, I don't think it's that it's not cool that he's going on stage. It's what I saw a lot of was really weak material, bro.
Yeah, that's what I said was it's weak. For him, the material sounds like a boomer Facebook meme. But at the same time, I'm like, well, he was working out material. So like, I don't like to judge people working out material. However, he's not a comic anymore. Like that's kind of a thing for if you were he's a news story. He's coming back into something with his name attached to, and he knows full well what he's doing. He knows that this is going to happen. So
my particular take on Louis C.K. is the fact that it was what his exit statement was in his year of self-imposed exile. How he came back is not consistent with what he said, basically to save any semblance of a career he had left. Mm-hmm. And, that is a completely fair thing to point out. These things don't match, but we can't have a fair conversation about that or the situation with Kevin Hart and the Oscars, which I think is a lot more nuanced. Because everybody's just there is right speak and there is wrong speak, and nuance is evil. Nuance gets me in trouble. Just tell me what I'm supposed to say.
Well, this is what I find funny. I wanted to talk to you about white people talking about race and racism at home, but it sounds like it's just talking in general. We need to learn how to have a conversation.
But it's also the problem with white people talking about race is, especially online, in person too. Very few people, I won't say nobody, very few people are comfortable being the lone voice on a subject. And when you're a white person who does see some issues with the treatment of non-white people and you think there is some unfairness happening, you end up everybody's enemy extremely fast because most white people think you're a traitor and people of color say, don't speak for me.
Wow, but see, my theory is that like, maybe I'm just a different person of color, but I just feel that racism is a white person's issue. Well,
in North America, obviously structural racism is.
That's the only racism that really matters at this point.
Well, in China, the Chinese are conducting some pretty horrible racism against like the Uyghur people and things like that. It's not just, the Arab nations were intimately involved with the slave trade. Mm-hmm. It isn't just a
North American.
It isn't a white issue globally.
No, but I mean,
the imbalances in representation do skew advantage white people right now in North America in terms of media. That, more and more with Chinese money coming in, that's changing very, very quickly. But, that's undeniable. The fact that if you turn on the news, for instance, you're more likely to see a white face. That's just true. When people think doctor, they think something. When people think president, prime minister, they tend to think particular things along racial and gender lines. And those positions, doctor less so, Indians, brown guys are now doctors as well. But all those other positions, you tend to immediately think of a white man.
Well, this is going back to those statistics about how white people feel, a majority of white people feel they're being attacked. They are the victims primarily of racism more than black people in North America.
Yeah, sure.
And so, but that's how they feel, and I'm just like, you saying this stuff. Like, okay, if you look at most people in positions of power are white men. Right. They tend to be. It's right in front of them, but they can't see it, and they refuse to talk about it. Like you
know what it is? It's that white people look at those white men in positions of power, and they don't see them as like them because of how powerful the class distinctions have been historically among white people, especially among the British, Irish, and Scottish working classes. They might as well be a different alien species to the lords and ladies who are in power.
So wait a second. So that argument when you get a lot of progressives saying it's an economic issue, not a race issue, that's where that comes from then.
Oh, absolutely. It's the social striations that went along not just economic lines, but religious lines in England and in Ireland, and then unfortunately got carried over when, people left England and Ireland and all those places to North America to start new lives where they were supposed to be free from all that stuff, and yet the Catholic-Protestant divide still followed them in an ugly, ugly way, and then you get the Mormons in and everything went nuts and they were burning down people's printing presses.
That just blew my mind because it's just I'm hearing a perspective that I understand. I completely am. I understand the class struggle. I understand all of that, and I completely agree when they say it's class. But it's like to ignore race. You just explained it to me. It's not just a benevolent. It doesn't affect me. I don't care. It's part of that. But it's also like like you said, like it's they don't see themselves as those white people.
Oh no, they don't, and in many ways they aren't.
Yeah, no, they're not. That's the reality of it. They're not. But however, yeah.
See, I think this is easily overcome by everybody just practicing some empathy. I mean, my joke is I have an easier time relating because a lot of the stereotypes about gingers and black women are the same. Obviously that is a joke. Obviously somebody with red hair does not have it as difficult as a black woman in America, but we still get that hypersexualized, easy to anger, oh, you're fiery and
fiery. Yep.
And that gets fucking old.
Yeah.
And you end up checking, even if you try not to, you end up Michelle Obama-ing it. And, all I'm going to talk about in public is children's health because everything else gets me into trouble. There are emotions I'm just not allowed to have.
Yeah.
And that is a point where I can empathize. Not say I have it just as bad as a black woman. Oh, God, no.
Yeah.
It's my ability to go, you know what? This is hard for me. Imagine how much harder it is for somebody with worse problems.
Yeah.
And then it can go the same way as well, like with just people of color recognizing that there are very, very complex social stuff, like black people watching Game of Thrones, all that shit is true in one way, about the way you talk mattering. The way commoners and nobility speak differently, and you can't marry certain people, and you can't do certain things. It's a caste system by another name.
Yes.
And unfortunately, a lot of that stuff still exists to this day. My stepfather from Manchester really was more upset that my sister brought home a Catholic boy than that, my husband's Jewish. It was a bigger deal.
It's that British system. Yeah, my grandmother, my mother and grandmother grew up in Guyana. Well, my grandmother and there's a huge caste system there, and so she's dark skinned, but she saw dark skinned people as less.
Oh, one of the ugliest things I ever saw was in high school, and someone who was educated in British private schools in Jamaica, turning their nose up at someone who was clearly not educated, who talked wrong.
Yeah.
Like all those sort of striations, all those sort of class structures within the black community involving, hair and level of education and all that stuff, those exist in all communities in one way or another. And I think that while we can sort of recognize that, in North America historically, white people have had it the easiest because we were never enslaved to build a railroad or government buildings. There are still different classes of white people, and if everybody can just sort of chill for a minute and go, I'll let you have a few grievance points too.
Yes, I'm like I completely agree. I'm going to expand this. So white people should talk about race and racism, but everyone else should talk about this other stuff as well. It's empathy. It's just understanding other perspectives.
Yeah, I mean, the problem I get into is when I talk about my culture growing up. Because of where I grew up, my culture was heavily influenced by Afro-Caribbean diaspora. Just because of where I grew up. I know why free jerk chicken in the food court, man, is funny.
Yeah.
You know, when they dropped the first Wagwan in Luke Cage season 2, I jumped out of my chair.
Yeah.
You know, I love Blackish because they make grape soda and hair pick jokes.
Yeah.
Now, some people would accuse me of appropriation for that, but I didn't appropriate. That was my experience growing up. Where I grew up, even the white kids wore FUBU shoes. They didn't think that that wasn't for them.
Yeah. Again, you're talking about online culture too, right? Like when people are accusing appropriation without being around that person.
But it's also, I mean, accusing of appropriation in a situation like that, when you don't actually know a person's experience.
Exactly.
That is erasing various, you know, experiences that don't, it's almost a pro-segregationist attitude that people of different races cannot partake in cultures even though you grew up right there.
Like you have no choice. That's how you grew up. That's part of your background.
It's the plight of the white South African not being able to call themselves African American.
Yeah.
Because that's not what it means.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we've gotten into this like linguistic jail cell of all these euphemisms for things have now really constrained how we talk about things in a really Orwellian way. You know, like, and it makes it really hard for comics. I mean, the thing I said about the Louis C.K. thing that I got in a lot of trouble for was there's no such thing as a small club anymore.
No,
because one person has a camera phone, it's on the internet, and we're all stuck dealing with that reality.
Exactly, and you're dealing with, like, I know someone like Doug Stanhope was saying, hey, he was saying the same thing I was saying. He's working out in an open mic room. Like, that shouldn't be. But now you're dealing with people who aren't comedy fans or know anything about comedy. All stages are the same to them. They don't give a fuck. Whether you're working out material, whatever comes out of your mouth is the law.
Yeah, I personally think that open mic rooms should be like, you know, when you go to a movie sneak preview and they put your cell phone in a Ziploc baggie and you get it back at the end of the... Like, we can do that for movies, but not with comedy clubs. Yeah,
and then everything that comic says... Like, you're not seeing the end product. You're seeing the beginning of an idea. Yeah,
and that was my one sort of hesitation in criticizing Louis C.K. on that point, just because he was working out material. But we still have the right to go, dude, what were you thinking?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. Like, that's the other thing is, like, it's not censorship for people to be, like, either offended or upset or question what he's doing. That's not censorship either.
I think that white comics should just stop trying to be that. You can still make fun of your own experience. You can still make fun of sort of the butt-headedness inherent in mayonnaise culture, as I call it.
Yeah.
You know, mayonnaise and beer.
Yeah.
You ever burped mayonnaise and beer?
No, I haven't.
It tells you how truly evil those foods are. Like that combination, why do we do this to ourselves, white people? And it's not even good beer, right?
No,
it's bad-ass Pilsner.
Oh, yeah.
But, you know, getting away from that, like, I don't think that certain topics should be verboten. I don't agree with that. I just think you have to come at it with huge amounts of compassion because that's what makes you funny.
Yeah.
Right? Like, being very self-effacing, the fact that people like, you know, Ellen DeGeneres, I think, is just brilliant.
Yeah.
Because she's funnier as a clean comic than most offensive comics are every day of the week.
It's true.
Improv, like, right off the cuff. And, you know, she's sort of somebody who you can look at and go, you know what, you don't always have to panic and go for the crotch. You don't always have to try to get that uncomfortable laugh.
Well, I have a problem with comics who want to be edgy. I think if you're accidentally edgy or you're saying something that could be controversial, that's one thing. But when comics aim to be edgy, I find it boring. I find it like, oh, you're 17 and you learn the word fuck and you've no.
Well, I think also people grew up listening to George Carlin, who had sort of this righteous fury.
Yeah.
That in the age of mass broadcast censorship, there was a point to what he was raging against. Whereas now, I mean, HBO stands for Hey Boobs Out. We can hardly claim we live in a truly censorious media age.
Well, it's also George Carlin. If you look at him as like, you can't. He was saying things that no comic was saying before.
Yeah.
It was all new.
He was putting things together in a novel, clever, and funny way.
Exactly.
I mean, he's the smartest person in the world. If you're not funny, you're not a comic, man. You're a lecturer.
And he was saying stuff you believed. He lived by what he said on stage.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's been lost in a lot of these sort of culture-driven things, too. I think that's something that Howard Stern has in spades as well.
Okay, yes, yeah, I agree with that.
As offensive as he has been, there's times where, especially when he was going through his divorce, man, he went through a dark period.
Yeah.
And I found him really hard to listen to, but I really believed he was coming from an authentic place.
Doug Stanhope is another one like that, who's just...
Yeah.
Patrice O'Neal's like that. I mean, rest in peace. But yeah, these good comics... I actually believe Louis like that. That's why when he came out with the joke that he came out with, I was like, well, that's pretty hacky for Louis.
The unfortunate thing about him is it's almost like there's two people going on with him, right?
Yeah.
There's like... I've started to learn that with Louis C.K., he's always talking about himself.
Mm-hmm.
And he is a guy who has such low self-esteem that he has to humiliate himself by masturbating in front of near strangers. Like at least Charlie Sheen paid for his hookers.
Yeah.
Like Charlie Sheen is now the least scummy man in Hollywood by some standards. That's a sign of the times because it was all about, if you think about the humiliation inherent in that act, because, I mean, what are the women going to do? They're immediately going to go, oh, God, you can't not help that. All of a sudden, you've got Cyril Sneer from the Raccoons looking at you from some guy's zipper.
There's a reference.
That's
Cyril.
not supposed to be there, Gonzo the Great is in your pants, sir. What's happening here? Is that licensed?
Well, he was saying it on his TV show when he shoved that woman against the wall in the show, and he was telling us the whole time, and a lot of us didn't take it as, oh, no, it can't be.
Yeah, it's just like this ongoing exercise in self-flagellation.
Yeah.
It's like BDSM on stage.
Yeah.
And he really is the biggest victim of Louis C.K. is Louis C.K. The guy's obviously got some pretty serious problems.
That's true.
And unfortunately, once you kind of see that about him, you can't really find it funny anymore because you feel too damn sorry for him. And there are a lot of comics like that.
Well, that's the thing. With stand-up is all about the funniest stuff is the tragedy.
Yeah. Comedy is tragedy plus time.
But that's the funniest stuff is like, it's not nothing's worse than watching a comic who's desperately wants the crowd to be upbeat or happy and is just desperately trying to make them like them. The funniest stuff is like, hey, this is who I am. You better accept it because this is what it is.
Yeah, and I think that's what the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel was kind of going for with their stuff.
I haven't watched it yet.
I couldn't finish it.
Yeah.
And because it was and again, this is totally personal for me, and this is because this is who watches Netflix. It really did feel like a collection of first world problems. Pretty first world problems. And the fact that I thought when it was like, oh man, a woman's husband leaves her with 2 kids in the 1950s. Like the problem with that is women were left destitute.
Yeah.
Right? But all she did was move upstairs to her rich parents' place instead of being downstairs at her rich husband's place. Her quality of life really didn't suffer. And then she gets to go on all these wonderful adventures, crossing paths with guys like Lenny Bruce, and they really didn't.
Who was this for? Who was the show for? It doesn't seem like the character struggles at all.
Well, they really glossed over the fact that the way the police, the way the morality police and actual police went after Lenny Bruce, drove him into an early grave.
Yeah.
Like what happened to him was not cuddly or fuzzy or cheery in any sort of way, but he's just sort of there as it's Lenny Bruce, and if you know who it is, ooh, it's so edgy. But yeah, I after a while, just felt that she was kind of a spoiled brat.
Yeah.
And that's not the way that most people who watch that show relate to it. They're like, oh, wow, it's a great piece of women's empowerment. It's like, how? She's already way more empowered than most people, never mind most women.
Is it pop feminism, or would you say it's like just...
I don't know. I don't think it's trying to be feminist at all.
Okay.
And that's the one thing that saves it for me. I really get the sense that they're just trying to tell a particular story about a particular character in that change one way thing. Like, hey, what if the star of a Doris Day movie was a mouthy Jewish broad?
Okay.
Who isn't actually even played by a Jewish person, because of course she wouldn't be in a Doris Day movie.
Yeah.
But that's sort of the idea, and it survives just based on its sheer simplicity.
Okay.
That way, and it is sort of going, yeah, comedy is best when it's authentic and raw, and you're tapping into your own pain. You got to be really careful about how much pain you tap into at once, though.
Well, the idea for me with stand-up is especially with like someone like Louis or like Bill Burr or even Patrice O'Neill, it's tapping into that side, the dark shadow in the audience, right? It's like it's relating to the audience, the things that you don't want to admit in public. But it's like you said, like watching Louis is kind of what you realize now is that that's actually him.
Yeah, see, that's what I kind of thought Kevin Hart was doing in those jokes that got him in trouble with the Oscars.
Yeah,
is he was sort of speaking in a comedic way to that kind of the way uniquely it affects black men with homophobia, like internalized homophobia, and intellectually you can go, there's nothing wrong with being gay, I'm cool if my friends are gay, but my kid better not be gay.
Yeah.
He was speaking a very real truth that I just feel like the white LGBTQ plus community just pounced on him without stopping and realizing that he was telling a really ugly truth, which is we haven't solved this problem yet.
I got to wrap this up, but we went way over. I'm probably going to chop this up in two, but it's fascinating because I came in here with one idea of talking about white people talking to about racism, but it's just talking to you about all this stuff. There's like this just conversation.
Yeah.
Needs to improve.
The art of a conversation.
Yeah, it just, we need to, I read this book by Bell Hooks about love and like how love should be taught in schools. It's something.
Tough reading, man. Reading Bell Hooks about love is like reading the Marquis de Sade about love. Like, whoa!
she had this perspective. It was just amazing, and it was just like, this is kind of the same level of that for me. It's like that. It's deeper than just talking about race. It's just that we need to learn to have conversations. We assume that we know how to have conversations, and we don't.
See, I kind of feel it's even deeper than that, because before you have a conversation, you need to embrace your pain.
Yeah.
You need to embrace your own pain and your own struggle.
Well, wouldn't that all be like part of learning to have a conversation? Like just to...
It is, but you can't actually listen to somebody else if your own brain is screaming at you, right? And there are too many people, and that's why people have such harsh reactions to things, that there are too many people that are just barely getting by day by day, and they hear the term white privilege as meaning white people have no real problems, and that's not what it means.
Sorry, go ahead.
And so, I mean, it's just like, I had to get to a place where there are certain things I do not talk about online because they're too personal. When people start going at me, I don't respond well. So don't do that, stupid. You know it's not going to go a good place. Other places, it stings, but I can admit it hurts and process it and get on with it. Too many people think that if it hurts, you're doing something wrong, that it shouldn't hurt. A good conversation that challenges you does sting a little.
It should.
And that's why I thought, Michael Eric Dyson saying mean man, white man, I thought that had some merit in the public square. Yes, every white person who heard it cringed a little. But so so what? Like, how is that any different than black people having to sit through decades of hearing things like super predators and welfare queens?
Yeah, or discussions about how intelligent we are, or IQ,
articulate.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'm still really surprised when I hear anybody like people should just take articulate out of vocabulary.
Yeah.
It's just it's one of those words where you can't really explain why it bothers some people. It's just got a historical charge.
Well, the thing with Michael Eric Dyson saying, if you got sting from him saying that, like you said, if you want to have a conversation, you would have to analyze that sting. Why does that bother me?
Yeah. And everybody's going to sting over a different thing.
Yep.
Some people are going to sting, what do you mean? Like, that's the thing I know I really would have triggered on. Other people, if they're nursing a mental health condition, they would have been very sensitive to being called crazy.
Yeah.
It says something about a person. It's like telling people who your favorite Batman villain is. Never tell someone that. It says way too much about you. It's one of those things. Like, somebody can tell exactly where to poke you.
Yeah.
If you cosplay as the Joker, buddy, we know your weaknesses now. Like, it's one of these nerd tells that it's something I ask a lot of people. What's your favorite Batman villain?
And yeah.
Because I know something really core, really fundamental about them. And you can use that power for good or you can use that power for evil.
Yeah, I'm never telling you my Batman. I'm keeping that shit to myself.
Yeah, I think you said something once, but yeah. No, Batman villains, that's why Batman's brilliant, sort of the psychology of the rogues gallery.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we should be able to trust each other with our vulnerable bit. The problem is everyone's in tank mode now. This idea that with emotions, nothing should get through. If we hurt, we fail.
Well, I find a lot of people have been told I have it. Like I was out in Ottawa doing shows and I was explaining an experience and I had a dude come online and tell me how my experience is wrong. And that thing irritates the fuck out of me. And it's always a white dude who needs to tell me how to interpret my own experience, though they're not there. And I find a lot of people have lived that, and now there's that, fuck you, I'm not listening to you anymore. There's that reaction of, I'm just not, you what you say is wrong.
I'll end on this, because this was a really cool experience. I did a roundtable discussion at Con Bravo, which was a diversity and fandom roundtable. I wasn't showing up as a speaker. I was showing up as a facilitator. We put all the chairs in a circle, and I just went around letting different people talk. And some people showed up. A lot of people with autism showed up. It was really, really interesting. A lot of anime fans. They wanted to talk about not diversity in terms of race or gender identity or anything like that, but actually diversity of opinion in fandom. The fact that the brown coat Firefly fans can't stand kind of Doctor Who fans or whatever, like these fandom rivalries, Star Trek versus Star Wars. They want to talk about that. I'm like, you know what? That's something I didn't consider. Good for you.
Yeah.
But the lone white guy in the room, and he was wearing the Wolf Clan medallion around his neck from The Witcher.
Yeah.
So I just kept calling him Witcher Guy, because that's a bold move to walk in a room on diversity with a symbol from a Polish video game that's like pretty much all white people.
See, I don't know the game, but yeah.
Yeah, see, it's been accused of racism and sex. Really, Witcher 3 is a really, really great game.
Okay.
On its own merits, it's a really good sort of open world hack and slash RPG thing. But he became sort of the de facto villain of the discussion, and I had to keep pulling people off of him and go, whoa. And then near the end, he talked about the fact that he was on the autism spectrum.
He
didn't disclose until the end, and you felt the entire room change their opinions regarding him.
He had a vulnerability that they could relate to.
Yeah, all of a sudden, all right, we're more alike than we thought. You don't have it as easy as we thought. And that's a logic fallacy that a lot of people go into conversations with. Never assume someone yelling on the internet or on a mic at a comedy club has it easy.
Easier than,
Because no one ends up there on anything but a river of pain that they're trying to process. I mean, I don't know of anybody with a really happy life that gets into comedy.
No, we don't. We don't have.
No.
And when you
No.
do, you're just like, I can't do this anymore.
Well, it's like I kind of want to go do other things.
Yeah.
Like, there's more to life than
Yeah,
sucking up secondhand smoke from 10 years ago in comedy clubs.
Yeah, I don't feel like making people laugh anymore. I don't give a shit. It's just,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. It's songwriting's the same way a lot of the time, and eventually, you get a real great who strikes that balance, like a Jerry Seinfeld or somebody like that.
Mm-hmm.
And what they end up doing, they tend to end up producing other people.
Yeah.
Which unfortunately is something Louis C.K. was really good at, getting other people's projects made, and all that suffered when he went down.
Oh, yeah, it just all, like, Tig Notaro show, all of it just, blankets, all of it, yeah.
It sucks, but, there we are. I think this is just the beginning of a very lengthy conversation, and, I think it's very worthy.
Well, we'll talk again. We'll do this again. Yeah. But this is thank you. It is very enlightening. It was a different perspective on it completely didn't go the way I wanted it to go, but I loved it. I thought it was amazing.
Those are good conversations.
Yeah, it was a great conversation. I enjoyed it a lot.
Conversations are jazz, not a symphony.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
Yeah.
It is. It's all improv.
Yep.
Okay. That